Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for being here. The plan is I'm going to interview the Deputy Prime Minister for a bit, and then I'd like to open it up for questions. So please think of the questions that you want to ask. For those of you who feel like you have to go to the bathroom, I'm sorry. We just keep rolling here in the sessions. But just for a person who really needs no introduction, I do want to say a few things about the Deputy Prime Minister. He's also the Minister of Finance. If you look at his career, it's amazing. This is someone who has, in every place he's been distinctive, whether it be as a permanent secretary in trade, negotiating vitally important trade deals for Singapore, someone who ran the Monetary Authority of Singapore, Singapore being one of the most important financial centers in the world, being recognized for that. In 2011, I think it was, he decided to go into politics, which is a pretty brave thing to do. And that election was quite a interesting election. Let me put it that way in Singaporean times in terms of where it was. And then through that time, as Minister of Education, which I know is a deep passion of yours, education and skilling, led many conversations with Singaporeans. I think it was called Our Conversations, just to get an understanding of where Singaporeans were and so forth. And then he sort of continued to evolve, and being the Minister of Finance and the Deputy Prime Minister. And you know, there's other things he's being set up to do. But I think one of the things that's most interesting is he was a police officer. Okay, he was a police officer. He was in the police force for 15 years. And I might, before going, what did you do as a police? Were you in the back room looking at data, or were you on the street?
No, I started right at the front line. You know, I remember once we had a traffic light breakdown, and I was in a patrol car. I said, "Well, let's get down and control traffic." And believe me, it's not as easy as it looks. Because you have no visibility of where the cars are, where it's coming, and you know you can't see how far the tailback is, and you just hope for the best and that you don't get knocked down. So I have a lot of empathy for the front line.
Yeah. So this is a person who knows the street as well as the policy. So look out tonight too if anyone's misbehaving in the system. But what I wanted to do is sort of ask the following sets of questions, if it's all right. One is, you know, a bit of the context of the world. Just how do you,
sure,
from your point of view, where do you see things? Then I want to go in a bit into what does that mean for Singapore? Yeah. Where are, you know, what are the opportunities and challenges? And then go into what does it mean for the people, and then for actually the corporation. I'm saying this because I usually lose track through it, so I can remember.
All right.
But why don't we go just a bit of the global context? Where do you think we are? You heard Neil Ferguson talking about some of the dynamic changes that were underway and so forth. But what's your sense of the world?
Well, thanks, Dominic, and thanks for moderating this session, and to our students at St. Gallen in the IC. Thank you for inviting me. I must say that they have done an excellent job, and for a symposium that's organized by students, I must say it's extremely high quality by any standard. Now, let me start with what is happening, what I think is happening around the world. I think we're seeing a period of very significant changes in belief system, in our politics, and a great sense of uncertainty around the world, and driven by a number of factors. One is the retreat from globalization, the sense that globalization has left people behind, and therefore they are not benefiting from it, the sense of growing inequality, and that this is not a fair system. And of course, in many places, when you have unemployment, particularly of youth, is particularly difficult and painful. And the world is also undergoing very significant demographic transitions. Many parts of the world are aging. Singapore is one of them. China is aging, going to age rapidly. Japan is aging, and many countries in Europe as well. But in many other parts of the world, you have a very youthful population, but the education system has not quite caught up. So you're undergoing a very significant period of transition. So because of that, this sense that within country, this growing divide between the haves and have-nots, between the elites, and this, we spoke about it last evening when Federal Councillor Karen also spoke about that. This sense of alienation almost. Now that's one. And two, many of the belief system now can be spread across the globe very, very quickly. You know, just as we thought that we had some success against ISIS, and you know, the very tragic bombing in London and all that. Recently, you had it on the other end in Christchurch, where Muslim worshippers were attacked in a mosque. So there is a period of uncertainty, and I don't think we've won the war against terrorism, against extremism. Now, so radical beliefs are surfacing in ways which are getting more dangerous because the impact of what they do is extremely significant across. And of course, you add to that this social media and the internet, which spreads news so quickly all around the world. And there's a great danger that you have fake news, you have interference in domestic elections and so on. This is a period of great debate. So that's one set of changes. The other set of changes is an economic one. Just now you hear Professor Ferguson about, you know, the different brands of socialism and so on. And in that area, you recall that several years ago there was this term BRIC, the BRIC economy, BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Now in our part of the world, we feel significantly the growth of China. I have visited China many times and look at the developments in China. It is very impressive. Now, the question for China is, will China grow rich before it grows old? Because China is also undergoing a very significant demographic transition. So you have that change. And then, of course, the other one is on, you know, in India, the population is continuing to grow, it's youthful. And India is also catching up. And what is happening in China is putting a lot of pressure on India to also make changes. And within Southeast Asia, the 10 economies of Southeast Asia, fortunately, after the Asian financial crisis, have made a lot of changes. And they're growing quite nicely. Today, the 10 economies constitute about the 6th largest economy in the world. And I've been looking at all the various projections by analysts, and the consensus is it's likely to go to the 4th largest in the world. And hundreds of millions of people are going to be uplifted. So it is a very significant set of changes for us. Then you add to that technology, you know, with Industry 4.0, what does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for jobs of the future? What does it mean for skills of the future? Then, of course, you add to all that, you know, climate change and what we need to do to safeguard the planet and to make sure that the environment remains one in which we can survive. And for a little island state, it is very significant when sea level rises. Yeah. So we are getting some help from the Dutch to try out building polders to see whether that may keep up some of the flood water.
So a pretty calm environment that you're dealing with is basically what you're saying. Globalization being challenged, new sort of growth coming from new areas, rising inequality,
yes,
just a ton of change. And what about Singapore? And you've led the thinking about the future of the country, the councils on that, which and recently it's now a tripartite group, including labor and so forth. But where is Singapore going to play in that?
Well, you know, early on, you know, you hear Professor Ferguson about today. How do we organize our economy? And we do believe in a number of key things. One is we do believe in globalization. Trade is 3 times our GDP, and so it's very significant. And two, we think that the economic transformation has to continue. We can't just stop. But the key is how do we do it and not protect jobs, but protect workers? How best do we prepare our workers for the jobs and jobs of the future? And in that regard, we started this journey. We had I chair a committee on the future economy, and when the committee completed its work, I continued to chair a Future Economy Council. And the Future Economy Council, in both committees, we bring together the business leaders, the unions, which represent the workers, and our government agencies to look at how we can do this transformation together. And I think the work has been going on quite well. We looked at the economy and divided the economy into 23 sectors, which represents about 80% of the economy. And in every sector, we look at integrating 4 strands of work. First, jobs and skills. How do we prepare workers for the future? How do we redesign jobs and enhance skills of workers? 2, technology and innovation, because this is going to be a significant driver of growth in the future. 3, productivity. How do we raise productivity across the globe? Across the sectors. And 4th, how do we internationalize? The Singapore economy by itself is small, and therefore companies that are based in Singapore can use it as a base to get out to the region. And with the growth that we are seeing in China, in India, in Southeast Asia, we think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to do more of that. So we had a Future Economy Council and now the Future Economy Council is driving many of pieces of this work, and hoping to do it in a much more strategic way, in a more integrated way, and also looking for long-term outcomes.
And it seems too, it's as you said, a tripartite. It's involving corporations, it's involving labor, it's involving government. Like
right.
the committee member, how big is the committee? Was the committee how many people were involved in that?
Oh, it's when we first started, it's 20 over, and today, in fact, it's 20 over in the main committee, but every main committee member chairs a subcommittee in order to have a more granular deep dive into specific sectors. And having done that piece of work, we are now regrouping the 23 into 6 clusters, because there are 6 clusters, for example, advanced manufacturing, where the Internet of Things and the digital technology is going to significantly change the manufacturing sector. But going into advanced manufacturing, for example, is significant. And I was manufacturing today is 20% of our GDP. And when I came to Switzerland, I learned that in Switzerland, manufacturing is 25% of the GDP. So I say, well, the Swiss with such a high standard of living and such a high cost is still able to retain 25% of manufacturing. They have done something really right.
One of the challenges, it's a very it's extremely well thought out. You could do a Harvard Business School case in terms of how you set all this up, but sometimes people don't like rational approaches. Sometimes people, you think about populism and things that are going on now where they have their own beliefs about how things work, and you have a plan. How are you ensuring that people in Singapore are connected, or that there's a linkage? Because I would imagine that you just as in Singapore and other parts of the world, you can get a bifurcation. So how do you deal with that?
That's a very significant question, because I think in whatever we do as political leaders, it's critical that we put people at the center of all that we do. Because at the end of it, we're not pursuing economic growth or innovation for the sake of growth or innovation, but rather to see how we can improve the lives of people, improve the lives of workers. So in that regard, there are a number of things that we need to do. I mentioned earlier that it is key that we protect workers and not jobs. So in that regard, our unions play a very important role, that they do not take a confrontational approach, but rather a collaborative approach with the companies to see how we can reskill workers, redesign jobs, and to ensure that they have a better future. And we are rather, you may be surprised that the leader, the Secretary General of our National Trade Unions Congress is also a full cabinet minister, and he attends cabinet meetings. He is also a key member of my Future Economy Council. And every time we talk, he say, good, so what does this mean for workers? What can we do? So I think that it's a very important stream of work. The other very important stream of work is that we want to ensure that there are multiple platforms in which we as elected members of parliament can reach out to our people and that any concerns that they have, any suggestions that they have can be considered, can be implemented. So for instance, every member of parliament in Singapore spends one evening a week to have a Meet the People session where our citizens will come if they need some help or they have some issues to take up with certain agencies. We do that all the time. We spend a lot of time on the weekends walking the ground, going to neighborhood centers, going to food centers, hawker centers, to talk to our residents and to get a feel for how are people feeling. Members of parliament do house visits from house to house to talk to residents and get a sense of what is going on. So that's one stream of work. The other important stream of work is that you mentioned a few years back in 2015, we started our Singapore Conversation. Now, our Singapore Conversations, when we planned it, it was a very open one. Citizens can just come and say, well, we're going to have this session. I remember my first session, there was a young man who came up to me and said, Mr. Heng, you put me in a group of people, all different age groups and quite a few older people. Can I change? I came to talk to young people. I said, no, I know there are some very sweet young ladies in the room, but please stick to the group. At the end of it, he came up to me and he said, thank you so much for not allowing me to change. I said, why? He said, well, I learned so much in this 1 hour of conversation because I've always been, in educational institutions, I have young friends, but I really didn't know that older people have such different concerns from us. And I have such a better understanding of the concerns of different segments of our population. I say, oh, that's wonderful. This is exactly what we hope to do, that among citizens, that dialogue promotes deeper understanding. So that's one part of it. And of course, we got some really good feedback about what are the concerns of our citizens. So one major area, for example, was that the older people were concerned that since they grew up in Singapore, when Singapore was developing, they don't have a lot of savings. And as you grow older, healthcare cost is going up. They're concerned about healthcare costs. So we discussed it with the Prime Minister, and we came up with this thing called a Pioneer Generation Package. So for those born, just around the time of Singapore's independence, they get this package where it takes care of a large chunk of their healthcare expenditure. And then we went on to the second step, which is that to explain it properly. And so we got some volunteers from the community who will go around explaining to them about the package. And interestingly, the community volunteers decided that, well, why do we spend the time just talking about, healthcare costs? Why not spend time to talk about how to keep healthy? So they end up organizing activities for the senior citizens to come together. And because 80% of our population live in government-built apartments, it makes it very easy for them to come down to the void deck, and we created Neighbours Corner where they can come and enjoy activities together. So retirees and they come together to play games, to play sports, and to share meals, and that has been very useful. So we hope to continue with that this dialogue among citizens. And so our Singapore Conversation was very helpful in doing that. And then during the year when Singapore celebrated 50 years of independence, we had a series of activities where we provide a small amount of funding for citizens to organize activities to see what does independence and being able to determine your own fate means for you, and how do you celebrate. One of those activities which I enjoyed tremendously was that when citizens came together and said, we are multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural society, and we must bring people closer together. And the one thing that Singaporeans love is food. So we cook food of various types, by different races, and enjoy a meal together. And that interaction is very important to promote good bonding. So that's been very helpful. And in fact, I've just mentioned a few days ago, in a media interview that we are going to do, hopefully do a next stage of it. Last night, the students were student MCs were very good. They said, St. Gallen Symposium is a forum for us. Let's talk. So our Singapore conversation was let's talk. So the students said, beyond talk, let's do. So what we're hoping to do is that the next round of our conversation, we focus on let's do and let's do it together. And one of the things which I'm hoping to develop is that our society today is very different from when we became an independent nation in 1965. Our society today, our people are better educated, they have higher aspirations, they have more diverse views. But in order to meet a growing diversity of needs and aspirations, what we need is to have leaders at all levels of our society, where if we feel strongly that something ought to be improved, something ought to be done, they could come together and say, well, we should not just talk about there's this problem, there's that problem, but what can we do together to make things better? Whether it is about just an immediate neighborhood and how you make the neighborhood nicer, whether you believe that we should grow more trees in Singapore, whether it is about keeping the environment better, whether it's about taking better care of the elderly, taking better care of young people, taking better care of the disadvantaged groups. We had many good conversations so far, and I'm hoping to take it to another level.
I mean, a lot of what you're saying, what goes through my mind is social capital, and from the speaker from Canada and Afghanistan, how to build that. And I think about Neil Ferguson's chart of the polarization, the red and the blue blobs, if you will. But it sounds like a lot of you as much as you work on kind of where the country needs to go and the actions, you're intensifying the kind of the getting people together. Is that a fair way to say it?
No, indeed. And also it is a very important process of building trust among citizens, and also between the citizen and the political leadership, and between workers and the managers. So that at all different levels, it is critically important that we build that trust and we have that sense of responsibility. And on that, I would say that if you think about many of the issues that we are tackling, whether it's about climate change or global pandemics and so on, I think our sense of responsibility must extend not just to ourselves and the next generation, but even to generations unborn. That if you think about safeguarding the environment, it is not, we hope that our children and future children can continue to enjoy a better environment, better earth, and that's why on issues like climate change, on issues like taking care of the environment, we take it quite seriously. And I'm very glad that when I came to Switzerland, I met so many people who talk about it. I met so many students and spoke to them and said, what is the biggest thing that you guys are concerned with? And they said, well, environment is one of them. And I thought that is great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I just want to ask one last one, and then please, we'll turn the lights on to any questions that you want to ask. Put your hand up, we'll get a microphone.
Right.
With that context, you're talking a lot about the change in the world and Singapore's role and the need to kind of get people together, and you talked about reskilling and so forth. What's the role of capitalism or the corporate? We think about the overall theme, capital for purpose. What, from your vantage point, what is the role, and has anything changed? Should there be a broader responsibility? Should people just stick, we're there to create, services and new products and so forth and get on with that? Or has that changed, and has your view changed?
Well, I think that it's very good that this symposium is about capital with purpose. And I think what I was very struck by was that I took the last 2 days visiting a number of Swiss companies, whether it is ABB or Co-op and Bullock company, and as well as the companies in Switzerland, the MEMS, Swiss MEM group, as well as the Digital Switzerland and so on. And what struck me is how many of the companies in Switzerland spoke about purpose. And that is not just about making a big profit, but really what is the purpose behind what you do? Whether it's a startup trying to change the world, trying to make the world a better place, or whether it is a company. Now, I think earlier on, Professor Ferguson talked about different modes of socialism and capitalism. I do think that the market-based principles of allocating resources is still the best. Communism has failed, and the idea that it should be allocated. We should be pursuing equality of opportunity and not equality of outcome. But at the same time, we need to address these issues of the rising inequality. So the question of how do you strike that balance is a very critical one. And I think companies can play a very significant role in this. One is how companies need to transform, need to restructure in order to stay relevant, because the global competition is going to be there. And how do you do that in a way that still takes care of your workers? I visited a number of companies in Switzerland. I learned a lot, because I noticed how many of them are so careful in doing it stage by stage. So yesterday I visited ABB to look at ABB won the Factory of the Year in 2018. Highly automated, highly sophisticated, but yet the way in which workers have been retrained and as ABB expands its operation, it creates more opportunities for the workers. So I thought that's very, very thoughtful. And I think we need to do a lot of that. And sustainability, in many senses of the word, is key, because without profit, the operations cannot continue. You need to recycle and make sure that there is enough to reinvest and to upgrade and to invest in science and technology and innovation. But without profit, you can't do that. And I've been struck by how even many of the NGOs now go into social enterprises, because they believe that profit is an indicator of success. I recently attended a charity event. This was where the speaker came from Europe, and she said, I've been accused as to why I'm speaking to companies to deal with problems of poverty and hunger. But really, companies can be the solution and not the problem. So the question is, how can we create that partnership? How can we create that win-win solution where the needs of savers and savers do want a good return, and the needs of workers and the needs of the enterprise is key. It can all be met. And I think partnership is key to this process. And of course, companies in looking after this will also really need to take care of the environment. And in that regard, I must say that companies in Switzerland, in the EU, are a lot more focused on the impact of their action on the environment. And I do think that it is important for all of us to commit to the Sustainable Development Goal and see what we each can do to contribute to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah. So I'd like to now open it up. We have probably time for 3 questions or so. Is that all right, Beata? Yeah. Right here.
Hello. Thank you very much for very inspiring words, and I'm apologizing about my voice. The changes in weather kind of had an effect on me. My question is, I really like that you mentioned the issue of trust, because this is a word that also resonated during our conversations in the previous 2 days among the leaders of tomorrow. So my question would be, what actions do you undertake to build trust of your citizens towards the government, for example? Because this is an issue in my region. For example, I come from Central Eastern Europe, and here we have a real breakdown of trust of citizens towards authorities. So this is something I would like to maybe ask you, what do you do, and has it worked? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. So a number of things that we are doing. One is I mentioned about the conversation that we have with the residents and the significant amount of interactions that we have with our citizens. So as a minister, I'm a minister by day and also a member of parliament by night and over the weekend. So I spend a lot of time going to my constituency, talking to my residents, talking to them, and not just me. All members of parliament in Singapore do a lot of that. And of course, we are helped by a number of volunteers who believe that in what we do. So they help us to gather a lot of feedback. And now today with the Facebook and the email, every day I get lots of email and Facebook messages from residents who say, well, I have this issue, I have that issue, can you help me with it? So that is at a micro level a way of doing it. Then we talk about the Singapore conversation and what we're hoping to do. That's another important way of building trust. And a large part of it is really working in partnership. So for instance, when we did the work on restructuring of our economy, we have business leaders, we have business chambers, trade associations who have a large membership, and they, together with the unions, we come together and talk about what we should do, what we can do. And one very important aspect of it is really outcomes. Now, we try our very best. In fact, in Singapore, started by our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, is that you never, in any election, during the election period, promise things that you cannot deliver. Yeah. Because it is very easy to promise, but it is not easy to deliver. And credibility is important. What we promise, we must do our very best to deliver. And I must say that by being outcome focused, we have done well, even if it is something which is unpopular. Yeah. But we believe that it's better to be honest with our citizens than to say that well, it's not a problem. So for instance, I've done a number of things which are very unpopular. One is I've announced that we have a carbon tax which I announced 2 years ago is kicking in this year, 2019, because we want to signal that we take climate change seriously. 2, I've announced that I will have a tax increase of our GST from 7 to 9% between 2021 and 2025. So some people say, you're mad to announce a tax increase. I announced it last year. To announce a tax increase so far ahead. I say, well, our projection is that with an aging population, if we want to keep our healthcare system sustainable, we each have to do more in order to take care of our seniors. Then we had a parliamentary debate where the opposition said, why don't you just spend more money from the reserves? Because the Singapore government has an official reserves. And I said, no. And I explained to you why I said no. Because in our budgets in the last few years, it was not corporate income tax, it was not personal income tax, it was not goods and services tax that yielded the most money. The single largest component for our expenditure was an item called net investment return contribution. And net investment return contribution under our constitution is 50% of the returns from our reserves. Yeah? We can use up to 50% of the returns from our reserves that is smoothed over a number of years. And in order to use that, we have a constitution where elected president will provide a check. I have to submit before I'm allowed to even table a bill in parliament for our budget for the year. I have to brief her and I have to send a statement to her that to the best of our estimates, we will not touch past reserves because this is meant for future generation. It is a future fund for future generations. And at the end of the financial year, after the Auditor General has audited the account, I have to send another statement, a declaration that I, Finance Minister, declare that the government has not made use, have not touched the past reserves, and that you exercising your constitutional duty of protecting the reserves, I have to exercise my constitutional duty to verify that I have not touched a cent of the reserves. Yeah. And the reserves for Singapore is very important because during the global financial crisis, we sought the President's approval because in every term of our government, we cannot make empty promises that you are going to get this. Our constitution states that during the time that we are elected to form the government, we cannot touch the past reserves. We can only accumulate. And when we accumulate the reserves, if there is a major crisis and it's not enough, then I can go to the president to ask for her to release the parts of the reserve for our use. So during the global financial crisis, I went to the president to ask for two things. One, a package that was $20.5 billion to stimulate the economy and to make sure that good companies do not go under and that we have massive unemployment of workers. The second thing which we did was that there were many countries that started guaranteeing bank deposits. And I didn't think it was a good thing to do, but when so many countries started doing it, we faced a major problem of a bank run. So I went to the president after consulting my prime minister to make use of $150 billion of our reserves to guarantee bank deposits. And that brought calm and stability, and we did not have a single bank run. And that was most helpful to ride us through the crisis. And because of the package, the next year our economy rebounded by over 10%, and we didn't have... so building that trust that we say what we do, and we make sure that we do not just do it for the here and now, but really to think long term, to save up for the future, to respect the legacy that we've been left, and that to be very open and honest with our people. That I'm not trying to take a shortcut. The shortcut may seem like an easier way, but it can turn out to be a treacherous way.
There were we're running out of time. There were a lot of hands. Can I suggest that we take two questions
Good
together,
idea.
and then we'll hear both questions, and then you can answer
Thank you.
both. Is that all right if
Thank
we
you.
do it? So over in the far corner. Yeah. And then, yeah. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Kacper Staroszczyk. Thank you very much for the discussion. Myself, I studied in Singapore, and I saw the fruits of Lee Kuan Yew transformation. And I have a question about lessons learned, especially with the motion of the first panel and the role of the state. What are the lessons learned, and what could have been done better, if anything, by the Singaporean government? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then a second right here.
Hello, Mr. Heng. This is Andre from Hong Kong. So there's so much to compare between Hong Kong and Singapore, but commonly we see a new classes of entrepreneur in Southeast Asia. So as a government in Singapore, how do you see what would you expect the future young government leaders would interact with the entrepreneurs in future? What would the dynamics looks like in future between government leaders and entrepreneurs in 10 years? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the two questions. First on, what have been done, what are the roles of the state? I would say that for us, first and foremost, for Singapore, we are multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural society. And in the early years of our independence, we had racial riots. So I would say that the first and foremost thing that we need to do is to maintain a cohesive society, a harmonious society, and to promote understanding across all different religions. And that we should enable people to freely worship what they believe, follow the religion and what they believe in. And in the multiracial society, interreligious harmony is critically important. And so, for instance, we have a group called the Interreligious Organizations, where different religious leaders come together, and they do a wonderful job of promoting understanding. We have pretty strict rules against extremist preachers. We had some who came, and recently one of them was charged in court, in fact 2 of them, because they were preaching action against other religion, and it is not acceptable in Singapore. So that's one. 2 is that I think we do need to take care of the key components that will be critical to economic growth. Because I think we must respect that every citizen in the world will want a better life. Every government in the world must want to deliver a better life for their people. But the way to do it is not to retreat from globalization, but to provide support for globalization and to ensure that our companies, our workers can keep up with these changes. So for instance, I mentioned about our trade union Secretary General, being a member of the cabinet. So he recently discussed with me and said, we need to encourage companies to do more. I want to set up company training committees in all the key companies that we have unions, so that they see their responsibility in training workers. I said, well, that's a great idea. I said, well, can we provide a 10% extra subsidy just as a signaling device? Because our courses are already subsidized by up to 70%. And I said, well, if you want it to signal the significance of this, I'm happy to support you. And so we just announced that change. So maintaining, of course, security is a key part of it. And we do spend about a third of our budget on defense, on counterterrorism, on policing the streets. But in that regard, being able to create a system to provide better security, better healthcare, better education for our people, it is not how much we spend, it is really the outcome. I think many company leaders will be appalled if we say, we measure what you do by inputs. In fact, we focus a lot on outcomes. And recently, the World Bank did a human capital index to look at the health outcomes and educational outcome of people around the world. And I'm glad that Singapore did very well. And we're happy to share these lessons, because I think investing in our people, good healthcare, good education, good jobs, is critical to all our future. And being able to work together with people around the world in this agenda is key. So in fact, when I came to Switzerland, I visited so many of your really top-notch companies. And one of the things that we hope to do is to build Singapore as a global Asia node of technology, innovation, and enterprise. And that there can be keynotes all around, all over the world, like a string of pearls, but in which we can promote freer flow of people and exchanges, so that we can work together for a better outcome for all our people. Not just people in our own country, we have a responsibility, of course, to that, but also to work collaboratively with partners around the world, so that all of us can progress together. Now, the second question about entrepreneurs. Indeed, this is going to be very important. I'm very struck by how, whether it's the discussion in Davos earlier this year, or now in St. Gallen Symposium, or in the companies I visit, the focus that many companies and governments are putting on technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And I think entrepreneurs looking at a new way of doing things is quite critical. I see many big companies now setting up corporate laboratories and so on to do this, partnering companies, startups, and so on. So we have to think of a new modality in which the strength of a bigger companies in having its global distribution network can be harnessed with the sort of creativity of young entrepreneurs, and young or old, where I just have a better idea, and we see how the better idea can be scaled across the world. So those are exciting opportunities, and we do think that we would see contributions from whether it is entrepreneurs going for a social outcome or an economic outcome.
Excellent. One thing just on that, I happen to just be a witness in the room. One of the things the Deputy Prime Minister does is lead the research, RIEC, which is long-term research. And one of the things you had in there was a group of 15 entrepreneurs from around Asia, I think, to give input,
Yes.
advice into it. Anyhow, the screen's screaming at me to shut up and move on. So I want to, first of all, thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, for all the time you've spent. And
Thank you, Dominic. Dominic, for being a member of our research council and helping us to see how we can turn research results into outcomes.
Right. We have a break until 10:30, so we'll see you back at 10:30.
Thank you, Dominic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks again.